My son looked me straight in the eyes and said the words I never imagined I would hear. "Mom, you've been living off me for years." The room went silent. My granddaughter Emily froze with her fork halfway to her mouth. My daughter-in-law Jennifer crossed her arms and said nothing, which somehow hurt even more. I sat there staring at the dining table in the house where we were having this argument. A house I had paid for. A house that was still legally mine. Yet somehow, after everything I had sacrificed, my own son believed I was the burden. What Michael didn't know was that a single folder hidden in my closet could destroy everything he thought was true. Before I tell you what happened next, I'd love to hear from you. If this story touches your heart, please like and subscribe, and tell me in the comments if you ever felt unappreciated by someone you sacrificed everything for. I'd also love to know where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. Your stories mean more to me than you know. I wasn't always the frail old woman my son now seemed embarrassed to have around. There was a time when I could work 16 hours straight and still come home smiling. There was a time when my entire world revolved around one person. My son, Michael. Looking back now, that's probably where I made my biggest mistake. Not loving him, but making him the center of everything. My name is Cindy Simmons, and for most of my life, I believed sacrifice was what good mothers did. You gave, you protected, you endured, and someday, your children would understand. At least, that's what I told myself. 43 years ago, I married Robert Simmons. Robert wasn't rich, he wasn't flashy. He worked as a maintenance supervisor at a manufacturing plant outside Columbus, Ohio. But he was kind. The kind of man who remembered anniversaries. The kind of man who brought flowers home for no reason. The kind of man who always made me feel safe. When Michael was born, Robert held him in his arms and cried harder than I did. "I'll take care of both of you forever," he whispered. For many years, he did. We weren't wealthy, but we had a good life. A small house, family vacations every summer, Friday pizza nights, movie marathons during snowstorms, the kind of ordinary life that feels priceless once it's gone. Then everything changed. I still remember the phone call. I was working a morning shift at a grocery store. A stranger's voice asked if I was Robert Simmons' wife. The moment I heard those words, my stomach dropped. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Robert had suffered a massive heart attack at work. He never made it to the hospital. One minute I had a husband, the next minute I was a widow. Michael was 16 years old. I was 42, and suddenly the future looked terrifying. The weeks after Robert's funeral felt like a blur. People brought casseroles, neighbors offered condolences, friends promised to help. Then, little by little, everyone returned to their own lives, but grief didn't leave. Bills didn't stop arriving. And raising a teenage boy didn't suddenly become easier because his father had died. One night, after Michael went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table staring at our finances. I remember holding my breath as I looked at the numbers. The mortgage, utilities, insurance, food, college savings. Everything Robert and I had carefully planned suddenly looked impossible. I cried until sunrise. Then I wiped my face and got to work. Because mothers don't get the luxury of falling apart. Not when their children still need them. I picked up a second job cleaning office buildings at night. My mornings started at 5. My first shift ended in the afternoon. I came home long enough to cook dinner and check Michael's homework. Then I left again. Some nights I didn't get home until after midnight. I lived on coffee and determination. There were days when my feet hurt so badly I could barely stand. Days when I sat in my car and cried before walking into work. Days when I wondered if I could keep going. But then I'd think about Michael, and I would keep moving. He was a good kid back then. That's important for you to understand. The Michael I knew wasn't selfish, not at 16 and not at 17. And he was hurting too. Sometimes I would hear him crying in his room after everyone thought the house was asleep. Sometimes he would sit at the dinner table staring at the empty chair where his father used to sit. We were both grieving. We just grieved differently. One evening, after I got home from cleaning offices, I found Michael asleep on the couch. A blanket covered him. The television was still on, and there was a handwritten note sitting on the coffee table. Mom, I know you're working hard because of me. One day I'll take care of you. Love, Michael. I still remember reading those words. I still remember crying. Not because I expected him to repay me, but because I felt seen. Because for one brief moment, I knew he understood. I kept that note. I still have it. Sometimes I wonder what happened to that boy. The years passed. Michael graduated high school, then college. Every step forward came with another sacrifice. I sold jewelry Robert had given me. I canceled vacations. I delayed retirement savings. I skipped buying things I needed. Every extra dollar went toward helping Michael build a future. And I never regretted it. Not once. People often asked why I worked so much, why I never spent money on myself, why I always seemed exhausted. The answer was simple. I loved my son. I wanted him to have opportunities neither Robert nor I had ever received. When Michael got accepted into college, I cried harder than I had at his graduation. I felt like all those years of struggle had finally meant something. As I watched him walk across campus on orientation day, I felt proud. Proud of him. Proud of Robert. Proud of myself. I thought the hardest part was behind us. I had no idea life was quietly preparing another test. One much more painful than poverty. Because losing money hurts. Losing respect hurts far more. There was one thing Michael never knew. One thing I never told him. After Robert died, there had been a financial decision I made completely alone. A decision that would eventually change everything. At the time, I believed I was protecting him. I believed I was giving him security. I believed I was helping him build a future without burdens. For years, I kept that secret hidden, not because I wanted recognition, not because I wanted praise, but because I wanted my son to succeed without feeling indebted to me. Maybe that was another mistake. Maybe some truths shouldn't stay buried forever, because secrets have a way of resurfacing, especially when people start rewriting history. And one day, years later, the son who once promised to take care of me would look me in the eye and accuse me of living off him. What he didn't realize was that the foundation beneath his entire life rested on a sacrifice he never knew existed. A sacrifice connected to a house. A house whose story was only beginning. Michael graduated from Ohio State University on a bright spring afternoon. I remember sitting in the crowded stadium clutching a bottle of water and a tissue, trying not to cry before the ceremony even started. But the moment I saw him walk across that stage in his cap and gown, I lost the battle. I cried anyway. Not elegant tears, not quiet tears. The kind that come from somewhere deep inside you. The kind that carry years of exhaustion, sacrifice, and hope. As parents, we rarely get proof that our struggles mattered. That day felt like proof. When the ceremony ended, Michael wrapped me in a hug. "We did it, Mom." Not "I did it." We did it. At the time, those words meant everything to me. A few months later, Michael got his first serious job with a logistics company in Columbus. Nothing glamorous, nothing that made headlines. But it was stable. It paid well. And most importantly, it gave him independence. For the first time since Robert died, I allowed myself to imagine a future that wasn't built entirely around survival. I even started thinking about retirement. Not immediate retirement, just the possibility. The dream, maybe a small condo someday, maybe traveling, maybe finally learning how to live for myself. Then Michael met Jennifer. At first, I liked her. She was smart, confident, ambitious. She worked in marketing and always seemed to know exactly what she wanted. Michael fell in love almost immediately. Within 2 years, they were engaged. I was thrilled. I wanted my son to have the kind of marriage Robert and I had shared. A partnership. A safe place. A family. The wedding was beautiful, small but elegant. Michael looked happier than I'd seen him in years. Jennifer looked radiant. And when they exchanged vows, I silently thanked Robert, wherever he was. Because our son had made it. At least that's what I believed. The first signs of trouble appeared shortly after the honeymoon. Michael and Jennifer wanted to buy a house. A beautiful starter home in a quiet suburban neighborhood outside Columbus. 3 bedrooms, large backyard, good schools nearby. Perfect for the family they hoped to build. There was only one problem. They couldn't afford it. Housing prices had risen sharply. Interest rates weren't helping. The down payment alone seemed impossible. I remember the evening Michael came to my house. He looked defeated. The way he used to look after losing a high school football game. "They accepted another offer," he said. I frowned. "What happened?" "We didn't have enough money." For a moment, he just sat there staring at the floor. Then he laughed bitterly. "I guess we're going to be renters for a long time." My heart broke. Not because renting is shameful. It isn't. But because I could see how disappointed he was. How hard he had worked. How badly he wanted to build something for his future. That night, after Michael left, I opened a locked drawer in my bedroom. Inside were documents I hadn't looked at in years. Financial records, savings accounts, investment statements. In one particular account, the money Robert had left behind, very few people knew about it. After Robert died, his life insurance policy paid out more than I expected. Not enough to make anyone wealthy, but enough to create options. For years, I had protected that money. I invested carefully. Added small amounts whenever I could. Watched it grow. Every time I considered spending it on myself, I stopped. Because in my mind, that money represented Robert's final gift to Michael. The next morning, I called a real estate agent. 3 months later, I bought the house, not with Michael, not with Jennifer, alone. The deed listed only one name, mine, Cindy Simmons. The decision wasn't about control and it wasn't about ownership and it was about protection. At least that's how I saw it. I worried that if the house belonged to Michael and Jennifer directly, financial problems, lawsuits, or future complications could put it at risk. I wanted stability for them, security, a foundation, something solid, something Robert would have wanted. When I finally showed them the house, Michael was speechless. Jennifer stared at me as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. "You bought it?" Michael asked. I smiled. "Think of it as a fresh start." His eyes filled with tears. For a brief moment, I saw the same grateful boy who had written me that note years earlier. The boy who promised to take care of me someday. He hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. "Mom, this is too much." "No," I said softly. "It's exactly enough." I never told them how much I'd spent. I never showed them the paperwork. I never explained where the money came from. And I certainly never mentioned whose name was on the deed. Why would I? I trusted them. The arrangement seemed simple. Michael and Jennifer would live there, raise their family there, build their future there. I wasn't interested in receiving praise. I didn't want gratitude. I just wanted them to be happy. A year later, Emily was born. The day I held my granddaughter for the first time remains one of the happiest days of my life. Tiny fingers, bright eyes, a full head of dark hair. She looked so much like Michael as a baby that it startled me. From that moment forward, I adored her, and thankfully, she adored me too. For several years, everything seemed wonderful. Birthday parties, holiday dinners, school events, weekend visits. The house became the center of family life, exactly as I had hoped. But little things began changing. At first, they were easy to ignore. Jennifer started making comments. Not openly rude, not yet. Just small remarks. Comments that left a strange feeling behind and "Must be nice not having a mortgage," or "I wish we had extra money lying around like some people." The words sounded harmless, but the tone felt different, sharp, judgmental. I noticed it. I just didn't want to admit it. Michael seemed different too, busier, more distracted, less interested in family gatherings, less interested in listening. Sometimes when I spoke, I felt like he wasn't hearing me at all. I told myself it was normal. People change. Careers become demanding. Families create stress. Life gets complicated. Still, something felt off. One Thanksgiving, I arrived early to help prepare dinner. Jennifer was in the kitchen. She didn't know I was standing nearby when she spoke to a friend on the phone. I only caught part of the conversation, but one sentence stayed with me. Honestly, Michael and I built everything ourselves. I froze. Built everything ourselves. Maybe she didn't mean it the way it sounded. Maybe I was being sensitive. But for the first time, I felt something I hadn't felt before, invisible, as if years of sacrifice had slowly been erased, as if history itself was being rewritten. I ignored the feeling. I wanted peace. I wanted family harmony. So I smiled. I helped cook dinner. I played with Emily, and I pretended nothing was wrong. What I didn't know was that Jennifer's attitude was only the beginning. Because over the next few years, gratitude would quietly turn into entitlement. And entitlement would eventually become something much darker, something that would threaten not only my relationship with my son, but everything I had sacrificed to give him the first time Michael suggested I move in with them. I cried, not because I wanted to, because I thought it meant I was loved. Looking back now, that realization hurts more than I can explain. At the time, I was 66 years old and still living alone in the small house I had rented after selling my old home years earlier. I had managed well enough on my own. I paid my bills, cooked my meals, went grocery shopping. Met my friend Linda Parker for coffee every Thursday morning. Life wasn't exciting, but it was peaceful. Then one icy January morning, everything changed. I slipped on my front porch. Nothing dramatic, nothing life-threatening, just a bad fall. I fractured my wrist and bruised my hip badly enough that walking became difficult for weeks. The injury itself wasn't the problem. The loneliness was, for the first time in my life, I felt old, really old. I remember sitting in my living room one evening trying to open a jar with one functioning hand. After 10 frustrating minutes, I burst into tears, not because of the jar, because I realized there was nobody there, nobody to help, nobody to notice, nobody to ask whether I was okay. A few days later, Linda came over. She found me trying to vacuum with my cast still on. "Cindy, have you lost your mind?" she asked. I laughed. Then I started crying. I worried her. Linda and I had been friends for almost 30 years. She knew me well enough to understand what was happening. "You shouldn't be alone right now. I'll be fine. You keep saying that. I will." "No," she said softly. "You're surviving. That's not the same thing." The conversation stayed with me. Knock. A week later, Michael called. At first, it sounded like an ordinary check-in. Then he surprised me. "Mom, Jennifer and I have been talking." That sentence should have warned me. Whenever a married couple says, "We've been talking," something important usually follows. "What about?" I asked. "Maybe you should move in with us." I was speechless. For several seconds, I couldn't even answer. "You mean temporarily?" "Maybe." His voice softened. "Or maybe permanently." My eyes filled with tears. After everything I'd been feeling lately, those words sounded like a gift. Like reassurance. Like family. "Are you sure?" "Of course." Then he laughed. "We have plenty of room." The irony of that statement would hit me years later. Because yes, there was plenty of room. After all, it was my house. But at that moment, I wasn't thinking about ownership. I was thinking about belonging. A month later, I moved in. Emily was thrilled. That was one bright spot from the very beginning. She ran outside when my car arrived. "Grandma," she threw herself into my arms before I could even close the door. I nearly fell over. "I missed you. I missed you too." She grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the house. "Come see your room. Your room. Not the guest room. Not the spare room. Your room. Sometimes children understand kindness better than adults." The room was beautiful. Fresh paint, new curtains, family photos. A small reading chair near the window. For a moment, I felt genuinely welcome. Jennifer even seemed pleasant. She helped unpack boxes, asked if I needed anything, offered to organize my medications. The first few months went surprisingly well. We ate dinner together most evenings. I attended Emily's soccer games. I helped with homework. Sometimes Jennifer and I even watched television together. I began thinking I had worried for nothing. Maybe this chapter of life would be different. Maybe aging didn't have to mean isolation. Maybe family could still be family. Then little things started happening. Small things, the kind that seem insignificant individually, but together create a pattern. The first incident involved groceries. One evening, Jennifer was reviewing receipts at the kitchen counter. She sighed dramatically. "Food costs are unbelievable lately." I nodded. "They certainly are." She looked directly at me. "Adding another person makes a difference." The comment wasn't openly rude, but it felt deliberate. I immediately offered money. "Let me contribute." "Oh no," Jennifer said quickly. Then she smiled. "But if you insist." I wrote a check that same week. Problem solved. Or so I thought. A few weeks later, it was electricity. Then water. Then internet. Then household supplies. Each conversation ended the same way. Another contribution. Another check. Another subtle reminder that my presence came with a price tag. I didn't mind helping financially. That wasn't the issue. The issue was how often I was made to feel responsible for everything. If the utility bill increased, somehow my existence was part of the explanation. If groceries cost more, it became a topic of discussion. If something broke, my timing always seemed suspiciously unfortunate. At first, I convinced myself I was imagining it. Then Linda visited. The moment she arrived, she sensed something. Old friends often do. After lunch, she pulled me aside. "Are you happy here?" The question surprised me. "Of course." She raised an eyebrow. That wasn't a very convincing answer, she knew. I laughed nervously. "Everything's fine." Linda wasn't fooled. "Cindy," I sighed. "It's just an adjustment." "Is that what you're calling it?" I didn't answer, because deep down, I wasn't sure anymore. A few days later, another uncomfortable moment occurred. Emily wanted to invite me to her school's Grandparents' Day event. She was excited. She had been talking about it for weeks. When she mentioned it at dinner, I smiled. "I'd love to come." Before I could say anything else, Jennifer spoke. "That's on a work day." Emily frowned. "So," Jennifer shrugged, "we're already busy." The room became awkwardly quiet. Michael stared at his plate. Emily looked disappointed, and I suddenly felt guilty for existing. The event was 2 weeks away, yet somehow my attendance had already become an inconvenience. That night I lay awake thinking about it, not because of Grandparents' Day, because of what it represented. I was beginning to feel less like family and more like an obligation, a responsibility, a burden. Months passed. The pattern continued. Subtle comments, polite criticism, tiny reminders that I occupied space. One afternoon, I returned from a walk earlier than expected. As I approached the kitchen, I heard Jennifer talking on the phone, and she hadn't noticed me. I stopped when I heard my name. Something in her tone made me freeze. Honestly, it's exhausting. A pause, then laughter, another pause, and then the sentence that changed everything. She's basically a financial drain at this point. My chest tightened. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Financial drain. The words echoed in my head. I stood there listening, frozen, heartbroken. Then Jennifer said something even worse. Eventually, the house will be ours anyway. I felt the blood drain from my face. The house, ours, not theirs, mine. For the first time in years, a feeling I had been suppressing finally surfaced. Fear. Not fear of losing money. Not fear of aging. Fear that the people I trusted most no longer saw me as family. And what frightened me even more was one question I couldn't stop asking myself. Did Michael think the same thing? Or had Jennifer been speaking only for herself? I desperately wanted to believe it was the latter. But deep inside, doubt had already begun growing. And soon, that doubt would become impossible to ignore. After overhearing Jennifer call me a financial drain, I spent several days trying to convince myself I had misunderstood. Maybe she had been having a bad day. Maybe she hadn't meant it the way it sounded. Maybe I was becoming overly sensitive. Aging has a way of making people doubt their own instincts. You start wondering if you're imagining things, if you're overreacting, if you're becoming difficult. For nearly a month, I talked myself out of what my heart already knew. Then Jennifer stopped hiding it. Not completely, but enough. The changes were subtle at first. A new list appeared on the refrigerator. Household expenses, groceries, utilities, internet, maintenance, cleaning supplies. At the bottom was a handwritten note. Everyone should contribute fairly. I stared at it for several seconds. Everyone. There were only 4 people living in the house: Michael, Jennifer, Emily, and me. That evening, Jennifer brought it up during dinner. I've been tracking expenses. Michael nodded absent-mindedly while scrolling through his phone. Okay. Jennifer looked toward me. I think it would be fair if everyone covered their share. I swallowed. I already contribute. You do. She smiled. But costs have gone up. Of course they had. Everything had gone up. But something about the conversation felt less like financial planning and more like accounting for my existence. I agreed anyway. What else was I supposed to do? I wasn't trying to create conflict. I wrote another check. Then another. Then another. A few weeks later, Linda came to visit. We sat on the back patio drinking iced tea while Emily played with her dog nearby. For the first time in weeks, I felt relaxed, normal. Then Jennifer stepped outside. Her expression immediately changed when she saw Linda. Not angry, not rude, just annoyed. "How long are you staying?" she asked. Linda blinked. "What?" Jennifer forced a smile. "I just mean we're having a busy day." The awkward silence that followed lasted only seconds, but it felt much longer. After Jennifer walked back inside, Linda slowly lowered her glass. "She's not exactly welcoming, is she?" I laughed nervously. "She's under stress." "Cindy," I avoided eye contact. "Cindy," I sighed. "Let's not talk about it." Linda looked at me with genuine concern. "You're covering for them." "No. Yeah, you are." I didn't respond because I knew she was right. Later that afternoon, after Linda left, Jennifer approached me in the kitchen. "I'd appreciate it if we had more notice before guests come over." Guests. The word hit me strangely. Linda wasn't a guest. She was my best friend. The woman had known me longer than Jennifer had known Michael. Still, I apologized. Again, that was becoming a habit. Apologizing for existing, for taking up space, for needing anything. Weeks passed. The atmosphere inside the house grew heavier. Emily remained the exception. If not for that little girl, I don't know how long I would have stayed. She would sit beside me after school and tell me everything. Who got in trouble? Who had a crush on whom? Which teacher was her favorite? What book she was reading? Children are honest in ways adults forget how to be. One evening, she sat beside me on the couch. "Grandma." "Yes." "Are you happy here?" The question startled me. I smiled. "Why would you ask that?" She hesitated, then shrugged. "You seem sad sometimes." My heart broke, because even a 12-year-old could see what I was trying to hide. I pulled her into a hug. "I'm okay." She didn't look convinced. Neither was I. The real turning point came one Saturday morning. I woke up early and headed downstairs for coffee. As I entered the kitchen, I heard voices, Michael and Jennifer. They were talking quietly, and they hadn't noticed me. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. But then I heard my name. "She doesn't even realize how much she's costing us." "Jennifer." Michael sighed. "We've talked about this." "Because it's true." Silence. Then Jennifer continued. "We pay for everything, Korika." I felt my stomach tighten. Pay for everything. What exactly were they paying for? I contributed every month. I bought groceries. I purchased gifts for Emily. I paid my own medical expenses. Yet somehow the narrative had changed. Again. I stood frozen outside the doorway. Then Michael spoke. And what he said hurt more than anything Jennifer ever could have said. "Just give it time." That was all. 4 words. No defense. No correction. No reminder of everything I had done. Nothing. Just give it time. I quietly walked back upstairs before they saw me. For the first time in my life, I cried because of my son. Not because he was hurting. not because he was struggling, because he had chosen silence. And silence can be betrayal, especially when someone is speaking badly about the person who spent decades protecting you. That afternoon, I found myself wandering through the house I had purchased, the house whose mortgage I had paid, the house whose down payment had come from years of sacrifice. Family photographs lined the hallway, pictures of Michael graduating, Michael getting married, Emily's first birthday, Christmas mornings, school plays, vacations, memories. I stopped in front of one photograph. Michael was about 24 years old. The year I bought the house, his arm was around me, both of us smiling. I remembered exactly what he had said that day. "I'll never forget what you've done for me." I stared at that picture for a long time. Then I whispered something I never imagined I would say. "You already have." A few days later, another incident confirmed my fears. Jennifer thought I was asleep. I was reading in my room when I heard her talking on the phone downstairs. Her voice carried through the hallway. At first I ignored it. Then I heard something that made me stop turning pages. "The house will be ours eventually." A pause. Then laughter. Another pause. "No, she doesn't have much." I sat upright. My pulse quickened. "No, she doesn't have much." What exactly did Jennifer think she knew, and why did she sound so certain? For years, I had intentionally kept my finances private. Not secretive, just private. I didn't discuss money. I didn't flaunt savings. I didn't talk about investments. Yet Jennifer spoke as though she had already calculated my entire worth. That conversation stayed with me. More importantly, it raised a question I couldn't stop asking. Why was Jennifer so focused on the house, not a room, not expenses, not groceries, the house? Again and again, everything seemed to circle back to the house. At first I dismissed it as coincidence, but the thought kept returning. What if this wasn't about me at all? What if I wasn't the problem? What if the house was? I didn't have proof, not yet, just a feeling, a growing uneasiness. The kind that settles into your chest and refuses to leave. One evening, as I sat alone in my room, I opened an old box of documents. Inside were papers I hadn't looked at in years. Among them was a copy of the deed. My name stared back at me from the page. Cindy Simmons, sole owner. I traced the letters with my finger. For some reason, seeing them brought comfort, almost reassurance, as if some quiet part of me already knew I might need those documents someday. What I didn't know was how soon that day would come, because the tension inside the house was reaching a breaking point, and before long, one family dinner would change everything. One sentence from Michael would shatter whatever hope I still had, and once those words were spoken, there would be no going back. The dinner that changed everything started like any other. That's what makes certain moments so frightening. The fact that you don't realize your life is about to split into a before and an after. It was a Tuesday evening, nothing special. Emily was talking excitedly about a science project. Michael had just returned from work. Jennifer was serving dinner, and I was trying my best to act normal. For weeks, I had been carrying around a growing sense of unease. The comments, the whispers, the conversations I wasn't supposed to hear. The feeling that somehow I had become unwelcome inside the very house I had sacrificed so much to provide. But I still hoped things could improve. I still believed Michael would eventually remember who he was. The son I had raised. The son who once promised to take care of me. the son who once cried when I worked too many hours. That evening, Emily was showing everyone a model volcano she had built for school. "It's going to erupt tomorrow," she announced proudly. I smiled. "I can't wait to see pictures," Michael nodded. "Looks great, sweetheart." Jennifer barely looked up from her plate. She seemed distracted, tense. I noticed it immediately. Years of motherhood teach you how to read a room. And Jennifer looked like someone preparing for a fight. About halfway through dinner, she finally spoke. Michael and I were reviewing expenses again. My stomach tightened. "Not this again." Michael sighed. "Jennifer." "No. I think we need to talk about it." Emily looked down at her plate. Even she recognized the tone. I remained quiet. Jennifer pulled out her phone. "I've been tracking household costs for months." I said nothing. "Electricity is up." Silence. "Groceries are up." More silence. "Medical deliveries." She glanced at me. "Other miscellaneous expenses." I slowly put down my fork. "What exactly are you trying to say?" Jennifer forced a smile. "I'm saying things are expensive." "Everything is expensive." "Exactly." I could feel the conversation moving somewhere unpleasant. Michael still wasn't looking at me. That bothered me more than Jennifer's words. Because if he disagreed with her, why wasn't he saying anything? I took a deep breath. "I already contribute every month." Jennifer nodded. Some, not enough." That was the message. The room suddenly felt smaller. Emily stared at her plate. Michael rubbed his forehead. And Jennifer continued. "I just think everyone should carry their weight." There it was. The sentence hanging in the air between us. Everyone should carry their weight. I looked directly at her. "Are you suggesting I don't?" Jennifer shrugged. "I didn't say that." But she had. Not with those exact words. But she had. Michael finally looked up. "Maybe let's not do this tonight." Relief washed through me. For a brief moment, I thought he was going to stop the conversation. "Protect me. Stand up for me." Up for. "Be my son." Then Jennifer laughed bitterly. "When exactly are we supposed to do it?" No one answered. So she did. Someone has to be realistic. The room went quiet. I could feel my heartbeat accelerating. Not because of anger. Because of sadness. Because suddenly I understood something. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't stress. This wasn't a temporary phase. Jennifer genuinely believed I was a burden. And Michael was letting her. I turned toward him. "Do you agree with her?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. For a moment, he didn't answer. Then he looked away. That hurt. Far more than any insult ever could. "Michael." My voice cracked slightly. "Do you agree with her?" The silence stretched. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15. Then Jennifer answered for him. "He doesn't want to hurt your feelings." My chest tightened because I suddenly knew what was coming. The feeling was instinctive. Like watching storm clouds gather, like hearing thunder in the distance. Something terrible was approaching, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I looked directly at my son. Let him speak for himself. Jennifer leaned back. Michael closed his eyes, then finally opened them. The expression on his face was one I barely recognized. Frustration, resentment, exhaustion, and something else, something colder. You want me to be honest? The question felt like a warning. I nodded. Yes, he laughed, not happily, not kindly. A bitter laugh. Then he said the words that shattered whatever remained of my heart. You've been living off me for years. The room went silent. Completely silent. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. For a moment. I genuinely wondered whether I had heard him correctly. Living off him, me. The woman who had worked 2 jobs after his father died. The woman who paid for college. The woman who bought the very house he was sitting in. The woman who had spent decades putting herself last. I stared at him, waiting for him to realize what he'd said, waiting for him to take it back, waiting for some sign that this was a terrible mistake. But it never came. Instead, he kept talking. We pay the bills. I felt numb. We support this household. Numb. We've been carrying everything. Numb. Each sentence felt further removed from reality. As though I had somehow entered an alternate universe where history no longer existed, where sacrifice had been erased, where truth had become fiction. Across the table, Emily suddenly burst into tears. Dad, stop. Michael froze. Emily's voice was shaking. That's not true. Jennifer immediately intervened. Emily. No. The girl stood up. Tears streamed down her face. Grandma isn't a burden. My heart broke all over again. Because the only person defending me was a 12-year-old child. Not my son, not another adult. A child. Jennifer ordered her to sit down. Emily refused, then ran upstairs crying. The sound of her bedroom door slamming echoed through the house. Nobody spoke. Not for several seconds. Eventually, Michael stood up. I didn't mean it like that. But he had, and we both knew it. You don't accidentally say something like that. Those words come from somewhere. From thoughts you've been carrying. From beliefs you've allowed to grow. From resentment you've chosen to nurture. I slowly pushed my chair back. My hands were trembling. Not from anger, from heartbreak. 42 years. 42 years of loving my son, and somehow we had ended up here. I looked at him one last time. Then I quietly said, I see. Nothing more. No argument. No screaming. No dramatic confrontation. Just 3 words. I see. Then I walked away, upstairs, into my room, and closed the door. A few minutes later, I sat alone on the edge of my bed. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I looked around the room. The room inside the house I owned. The house Michael believed belonged to him. The house Jennifer believed she would someday inherit. And for the first time, I realized something important. The truth wasn't going to save this family, not by itself. The truth needed proof, documentation, facts, protection. Slowly, I opened my bedside drawer. Inside was an old business card. David Harper, attorney at law, friend of Robert's, the man who had handled every important legal matter in our lives for decades. My hand hovered over the card. Then I picked up my phone. It was nearly 10 o'clock. Late, but not too late. David answered on the second ring. Cindy. The moment I heard his voice, tears filled my eyes. I need your help. The concern in his tone was immediate. What happened? I looked around the room, then toward the walls of the house, my house, and for the first time in years, I finally said the words aloud. I think my son has forgotten who owns this home. A long silence followed. Then David spoke. Cindy. His voice suddenly became very serious. There's something about that house you need to know, and what he said next would change everything. I barely slept that night. After my call with David Harper, I sat alone in my room staring at the darkness. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Down the hall, Michael and Jennifer had gone to bed. Somewhere upstairs, Emily was probably still awake, upset by what had happened at dinner. And I sat there replaying my son's words over and over. You've been living off me for years. Every time I heard the sentence in my mind, it hurt all over again. Not because it was true, because it was so completely false. I had spent decades sacrificing for Michael. Yet somehow he had convinced himself that he was the one carrying me. How does that happen? How does gratitude become entitlement? How does a child forget around midnight? I finally gave up trying to sleep. Instead, I opened an old photo album, one of the few possessions I had carried with me through every stage of life. Inside were pictures of Robert, pictures of Michael as a little boy, pictures of family vacations, birthdays, Christmas mornings, ordinary moments, the kind that seem unimportant until they're all you have left. One photograph stopped me. It showed Robert standing in front of a small brick building. His arm was around me, both of us smiling. I remembered exactly when it was taken. Only a few months before he died, I gently touched the photograph. I wish you were here, I whispered. Not because Robert would have fixed everything, because he would have understood. The next morning, I drove to David's office. The building looked exactly the same as it had 20 years earlier. David had been Robert's friend long before he became our attorney. He attended Michael's graduation, our family barbecues, even Robert's funeral. If anyone knew the truth about my life, it was David. When I entered his office, and he stood immediately. His expression softened. Cindy. Before I could stop myself, I started crying. Not dramatic sobs, just quiet tears. The kind that come when you've been strong for too long. David handed me a box of tissues, then waited patiently. When I finally regained control, he spoke. I reviewed the property records first thing this morning. I nodded. And he opened a folder. Several documents were neatly arranged inside. Then he slid the first page toward me. I immediately recognized it. The deed, the original deed. My name was printed clearly across the page. Cindy Simmons. Sole owner. No other names, no co-owners, Nas, no transfers, no modifications, nothing. David tapped the paper. You own the property. I know. No. His voice grew firmer. I don't think you understand. I frowned. What do you mean? He leaned back. Cindy, legally speaking, Michael has no ownership interest whatsoever. For some reason, hearing those words brought unexpected relief. Not because I wanted power over my son, because I needed confirmation that reality still existed. That facts still mattered, that the truth hadn't disappeared simply because people chose to ignore it. David continued. I checked every filing. He opened another folder. No transfer. Another document. No trust amendment. Another. No ownership change. Then he looked directly at me. As far as the law is concerned, that house belongs entirely to you. I exhaled slowly. Years of tension seemed to leave my body. But only briefly. Because another question immediately surfaced. Then why did you sound concerned on the phone? David's expression changed. Now he looked troubled, very troubled. He hesitated before answering. I found something unusual. My stomach tightened. What? David pulled another document from the folder. I received a call last month. I blinked. A call. From a real estate office. The room suddenly felt colder. What kind of call? David folded his hands. They were asking questions about the property. My heartbeat quickened. Questions. What questions? David continued. They wanted to know whether there were any legal restrictions affecting a potential future sale. I stared at him. For a moment, I couldn't process what he was saying. Sale. What sale, exactly? The silence that followed felt heavy. Then David said something that made my blood run cold. The caller identified Michael Simmons as the homeowner. I froze. No, 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 no. That couldn't be right. Michael wouldn't do that, would he? David carefully studied my face. You didn't authorize anything. No. My voice barely worked. No? David nodded. I didn't think so. I felt physically ill. Not because Michael had sold the house. He hadn't. He couldn't. But because he had apparently been exploring the possibility, thinking about it, considering it, and he hadn't said a word to me. David pushed another folder toward me. There's more. I looked up. More? How could there possibly be more? He opened the file. Inside were copies of documents from the original purchase. The sight immediately transported me back nearly 20 years. Back to the day everything began. Back to the day I bought the house. I remembered walking into the title office alone. The nervousness. The excitement. The fear. At that point, Michael and Jennifer had nearly given up on home ownership. Neither of them knew what I was about to do. The money came from 3 sources. First, Robert's life insurance policy. Second, years of savings. Third, investment accounts I had built slowly and carefully after his death. The combined amount represented nearly everything I had. Practically my entire financial safety net. I remembered sitting in the parking lot afterward. holding the keys, crying, not because I was afraid, because I was happy. Happy for my son, happy that he would have stability. Happy that he would never know the fear Robert and I experienced when we struggled financially. I had never viewed the house as an investment. It was an act of love, a gift, a foundation, a future. David interrupted my thoughts. You gave up a lot for that property. I laughed softly. That's one way to put it. No. He pointed toward the paperwork. Cindy, you practically emptied your future to secure his, The truth of that statement hit harder now than it had back then. Because back then, I believed sacrifice automatically created gratitude. Now I knew better. David closed the folder. Then he said something unexpected. You know, Robert once told me something. I looked up. David smiled sadly. It was shortly before he died. The mention of Robert immediately caught my attention. What did he say? David leaned back. He said your greatest strength was loving people more than yourself. A tear rolled down my cheek. It sounded exactly like Robert. Then David continued. And he said your greatest weakness was loving people more than yourself. I stared at him. The words landed differently now. Much differently. Because for the first time, I understood what Robert had meant. Love without boundaries becomes permission. Permission for people to take, permission for people to assume, permission for people to forget. David's voice pulled me back to the present. Cindy, I need you to listen carefully. I nodded. If Michael is exploring ways to sell that house to me, something is wrong. The seriousness in his tone frightened me. How wrong, David sighed. I don't know yet. Then he tapped the desk. But people don't investigate selling a home they don't own unless they're under pressure. Pressure. The word echoed in my mind. Financial pressure, debt. Something else I wasn't sure. But for the first time, a terrifying possibility entered my mind. Maybe this wasn't about resentment. Maybe it wasn't even about me. Maybe there was a reason Michael suddenly needed the house. And whatever that reason was, he clearly didn't want me to know. As I left David's office later that afternoon, I carried copies of every important document, the deed, purchase records, ownership history, proof. For years, those papers had been nothing more than old legal files. Now they felt like armor. Because deep down, I knew something was coming. Something bigger than an argument. Something bigger than hurt feelings. And if David was right, my son had already started making moves behind my back. The only question now was why. And I was determined to find out. After my meeting with David, I stopped looking at my son the same way. That doesn't mean I stopped loving him. A mother doesn't simply switch love off. If only it were that easy. No, I still loved Michael. What changed was trust. For the first time in my life, I realized there might be things happening behind my back that I didn't understand. And that realization terrified me. For nearly 20 years, I had believed the house represented security. Now I was beginning to wonder whether it had become something else. A target. I didn't confront Michael immediately, though David advised against it. Not yet, he told me. Right now you have questions, not answers. He was right. So I waited, and I watched. Sometimes the hardest thing a parent can do is stop rescuing. Stop explaining. Stop making excuses. Just observe. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. 3 days after my meeting with David, I was sitting on the back patio reading when Michael stepped outside. He seemed distracted, restless. He checked his phone repeatedly. Every few minutes he looked toward the street. Then, around noon, a black SUV pulled into the driveway. A woman stepped out carrying a leather portfolio. Professional, well-dressed, confident. Michael immediately walked out to meet her. My instincts sharpened. I quietly stood and moved closer to the kitchen window, not because I wanted to spy, because something felt wrong, very wrong. I watched them shake hands. Then Michael led her around the property, the backyard, the garage, the exterior walls. They spent nearly 40 minutes walking around, taking notes, pointing at things, discussing measurements. My pulse quickened. I had seen enough real estate transactions in my life to recognize the behavior. This wasn't a casual visit. This looked like an evaluation. When the woman finally left, I returned to my chair before Michael noticed me. A few minutes later, he walked onto the patio. Beautiful day. I looked up. Who was that? His expression changed instantly. Only for a second. But I noticed. Oh. He laughed awkwardly. Just someone from work? A lie. Not even a convincing one. I simply nodded. Years ago, I would have challenged him. Now I stayed silent. Sometimes silence reveals more than confrontation. The following week brought another surprise. I was helping Emily with homework when Jennifer received a phone call. She stepped into the dining room. The door wasn't completely closed. At first, I ignored the conversation. Then I heard one word, mortgage. Immediately, my attention sharpened. Jennifer lowered her voice, but not enough. No, we're trying to figure something out. A pause. Then, if we can access the equity, everything changes. Equity. The word echoed inside my head. Equity in what the answer was obvious. The house. My house. I felt a chill run through me. Jennifer continued speaking. I know. Another pause. Michael's working on it. Working on what? By the time she ended the call, my hands were trembling, not from fear, from confusion. Nothing made sense. Why were they talking about equity? Why were they meeting with people who looked like real estate professionals? Why had Michael lied? That evening I called David, again. He listened carefully as I explained everything. Then he asked a question. Cindy, have you noticed any changes in their lifestyle? I frowned. What do you mean? Large purchases, expensive vacations, new debts, anything unusual? At first I said no. Then I stopped. Because suddenly several things came to mind. The new SUV Jennifer had leased the previous year, the luxury family vacation to Florida, the expensive kitchen renovation, the frequent online deliveries, the constant spending. David remained quiet while I thought. Finally he spoke. I think you need to consider another possibility. What possibility? They may be under financial pressure. The sentence landed heavily. Financial pressure. The same phrase he had used earlier. only now it seemed much more plausible. After ending the call, I sat alone in my room thinking. The pieces weren't complete, nah, but they were starting to form a picture. A troubling one. Over the next several days, I became more observant. Not intrusive, observant. I noticed Michael becoming increasingly anxious. His phone rarely left his hand. He received calls at odd hours. Sometimes he stepped outside to answer them. Other times he drove away without explanation. Jennifer seemed even more stressed. Small inconveniences triggered major reactions. A missing receipt, a late package, a school expense. Everything seemed to push her closer to the edge. Then came the moment that changed everything. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. I had returned home early from lunch with Linda. The house appeared empty. Michael was supposed to be at work. Jennifer had taken Emily to soccer practice. At least that's what I thought. As I entered through the garage and I heard voices, Jennifer's voice and Michael's. They were in the kitchen, arguing. I froze. Not intentionally. The tension in their voices stopped me. "We can't keep doing this." Jennifer sounded panicked. "I know." Michael sounded exhausted. "You said we'd have it solved months ago." "I thought I would." Then silence. Several seconds. Finally, Jennifer spoke again. And this time her voice cracked. "What happens if they come after us?" My heartbeat accelerated. Come after us? Who for what? Michael lowered his voice. I couldn't hear everything. Only fragments. Fragments that somehow made the situation even worse. The payments. Behind. Not enough, dear child. Debt, say. Debt. There it was, the word I had been expecting. The word I had feared. Debt. A heavy silence followed. Then Jennifer said something that made my stomach drop. The house is the only way out. I felt the blood drain from my face. Not savings, not income, not investments. The house. Again, always the house. Michael didn't argue. That was what frightened me most. He didn't say she was wrong. He didn't tell her to stop. He simply remained silent. And silence can be an answer. Eventually, Jennifer spoke again. What about your mother? A pause. Then Michael sighed. We'll handle it. We'll handle it. The words sounded less like a solution and more like a plan. I quietly backed away before they could discover me. My legs felt weak. My mind raced. For weeks, I had suspected something. Now I knew. Michael and Jennifer were in serious financial trouble. I didn't know the exact amount. I didn't know the details, but I knew enough. And apparently they viewed the house as their escape route. The problem was simple. The house wasn't theirs. That evening, I sat in my room reviewing the copies David had given me. The deed. The purchase documents. The ownership records. Every page confirmed the same truth. Legally, the house belonged to me. Yet somehow Michael and Jennifer seemed convinced they could access it, use it, perhaps even sell it. The question was how. The answer arrived sooner than expected. 2 days later, Michael knocked on my bedroom door. His smile looked forced. Jennifer stood behind him, also smiling, also nervous. Immediately, my instincts warned me. Something was coming. Something planned. Something rehearsed. Michael sat down across from me. Jennifer took the chair beside him. Then Michael cleared his throat. "Mom, we need your help with something." I already knew this conversation wasn't going to end well, because for the first time in months, both of them were being unusually kind. And sometimes kindness arrives right before a trap is sprung. The moment Michael said, "Mom, we need your help with something," I knew exactly what David meant when he warned me to be patient. This was it. The conversation they had been preparing for. The reason both Michael and Jennifer suddenly seemed unusually polite. The reason they were sitting together in my bedroom looking nervous. I smiled gently. "What do you need?" Michael glanced at Jennifer. Jennifer glanced at Michael. That alone told me everything. Neither wanted to be the first person to speak. Finally, Jennifer cleared her throat. "It's really nothing complicated." Whenever someone starts a conversation that way, it usually means the opposite. I kept smiling. "Okay." Michael leaned forward. "We've been talking about the future." There was that phrase again. "We've been talking." The phrase that always seemed to precede trouble. I nodded. "The future is important." "Exactly." He looked relieved, almost encouraged. Then Jennifer jumped in. "We were thinking about simplifying things." I almost laughed. Simplifying. Such an innocent word. Such a dangerous word. I remained calm. "What things?" Michael took a deep breath. "The house." There it was. The house. Always the house. Never my health, never family, never relationships. The house. I lowered my eyes slightly, pretending to think. "What about it?" Jennifer immediately took control of the conversation. "We've been researching estate planning." Another lie, not entirely false, but not entirely true either. The most dangerous lies usually contain pieces of truth. It would be easier if everything was organized ahead of time. I nodded slowly. That makes sense. Both of them visibly relaxed. They thought I was accepting the explanation. They thought I didn't understand where this conversation was heading. That assumption would become their biggest mistake. Michael pulled several papers from a folder. My heart sank. David had been right. They had already prepared documents. Already planned this. Already assumed they could convince me, or manipulate me, or pressure me. "Nothing official," Michael said quickly. "Just paperwork." "Just paperwork." The phrase sounded almost insulting, as though I were too old to understand legal documents. Jennifer slid the papers across the bed toward me. "Take a look." I adjusted my reading glasses, then slowly began turning pages. Inside, I was furious. Outside, I appeared confused. That part wasn't difficult. Many people automatically assume older adults are confused. I simply allowed them to believe it. The documents weren't ownership transfers, not directly. They were authorizations, property management permissions, financial authority forms, documents that would allow others to act on my behalf under certain circumstances. Individually, they seemed harmless. Collectively, they were dangerous, very dangerous. I remembered David's warning. Never sign anything you don't fully understand. As I reviewed the papers, Michael watched closely, and Jennifer watched even more closely, waiting, hoping, expecting. I looked up. "What exactly does this do?" Jennifer immediately answered. "It just makes life easier." I nearly smiled. That wasn't an explanation. It was an avoidance. So I asked again. "What does it do?" Michael shifted uncomfortably. "It allows us to help if something happens." "What kind of thing, silence?" Then Jennifer answered, "If you became unable to manage things yourself." Interesting. Very interesting. Because until that moment, nobody had ever suggested I was incapable of managing anything. I paid my bills, handled my appointments, managed my finances, maintained my investments. There had never been a problem. Yet suddenly they were discussing control. Not assistance. Control. I nodded thoughtfully. Then I delivered exactly the response they weren't expecting. "I'll need time." The disappointment on Jennifer's face was immediate. "Time? Of course," I smiled pleasantly. I never signed legal documents without reviewing them carefully. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Michael forced a laugh. "Sure," but he looked disappointed too. Very disappointed. That reaction told me everything. If this were truly routine paperwork, waiting a few days wouldn't matter. The fact that it mattered suggested urgency. Pressure, need, desperation. Something was pushing them. After they left my room, I immediately called David. He answered on the first ring. They finally approached me. What documents? I explained everything. Page by page, detail by detail. David listened quietly. When I finished, he sighed. "They aren't illegal. I figured. But they're dangerous." "I figured that too." David's voice hardened. "Cindy, do not sign anything." "I won't. Not a single page, no? I won't." The certainty in his tone reassured me. At least one person still seemed interested in protecting me. The next few days became strangely tense. Michael asked about the paperwork several times, always casually, always pretending not to care. "Any thoughts?" "Still reviewing." No rush. Yet somehow there always seemed to be a rush. Jennifer was worse. Her patience was clearly evaporating. Every conversation felt forced. Every smile looked rehearsed. And for the first time, I began noticing something else. Fear. Not anger. Fear. Especially when they thought nobody was watching. One evening, I found Michael sitting alone in the backyard. His head was buried in his hands. Bills were spread across the table. When he noticed me approaching, he quickly gathered them. Too quickly, like a teenager hiding something. I pretended not to notice. But I had seen enough. The stack was thick. Very thick. And the expressions on his face told me those papers weren't good news. Later that night, another opportunity presented itself. I wasn't looking for information. Information simply kept finding me. Around midnight, I woke up thirsty. As I walked toward the kitchen, I heard voices in the living room. Michael and Jennifer again. Arguing. Their voices were low but intense. "This isn't working. Jennifer sounded panicked. I know. No, you don't know. I said I know. A long silence followed. Then Jennifer spoke again. We're running out of time. Time. There was that word. Again, the sense of urgency, the desperation. Michael's voice sounded exhausted. I'll figure something out. How? No answer. Jennifer laughed bitterly. Exactly. Then she said something that made my heart stop. If your mother won't sign, what are we supposed to do? The room fell silent. My heart pounded. Not because of the question, because of Michael's response. Or rather, his lack of one. He didn't say she was wrong. He didn't defend me. He didn't object. Instead, he remained silent. The same silence I remembered from the dinner table. The same silence that felt like betrayal. A few moments later, Jennifer spoke again. Her voice cracked slightly. What happens when they start calling again? Calling. Debt collectors, lenders, creditors. I wasn't sure, but every clue pointed in the same direction. The situation was much worse than I had imagined. Far worse. I quietly returned to my room before they could discover me. Then I sat on the edge of my bed for nearly an hour, thinking, remembering, connecting pieces, the house, the paperwork, the lies, the mysterious visitors, the secret phone calls, the arguments, the fear. It all fit together now. Not perfectly, but enough. Michael and Jennifer weren't simply struggling. They were drowning. And somewhere along the way, they had convinced themselves that my house was their life raft. The tragedy was that they hadn't come to me honestly. They hadn't asked for help. They hadn't told me the truth. Instead, they had chosen manipulation, deception, pressure. That realization hurt more than any financial problem ever could. Because money can be replaced. Trust cannot. The next morning, I called David again. After listening carefully, he remained silent for several seconds. Then he said something that sent a chill down my spine. Cindy, I think it's time we find out exactly how much trouble they're in. I stared out the bedroom window, toward the backyard, toward the house I had spent decades protecting. And for the first time, I realized the truth might be even worse than I feared. The next morning, I met David for breakfast, not at his office and not somewhere formal. Just a quiet diner on the edge of town where retired people gathered for coffee and nobody paid attention to anyone else's business. I arrived early. David was already there. A cup of black coffee sat untouched in front of him. That immediately worried me. David loved coffee. If he wasn't drinking it, something was bothering him. As I slid into the booth, he looked up. You won't like what I've found. My stomach tightened. How bad is it? David exhaled slowly. Worse than I expected. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he opened a folder. A thick folder, far thicker than the ones he had shown me before. The sight alone made my chest feel heavy. What is that? A picture of your son's financial situation. I suddenly wasn't sure I wanted to see it. But I needed to, so I nodded. David began carefully explaining everything. Michael's problems hadn't started recently. They had been building for years, slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. A few poor decisions here, a little overspending there. Nothing catastrophic by itself, but together disastrous. The first major issue appeared about 4 years earlier. Michael had become interested in real estate investing. Not buying properties, speculating. Following online financial experts. Listening to people promising quick wealth. The kind of people who always seem successful on social media. The kind who rarely show their failures. Michael had invested a significant amount of money. At first, things appeared promising. Then the market shifted. Several projects collapsed. Most of the money disappeared. I closed my eyes. That sounded exactly like something Michael would keep secret. He hated appearing unsuccessful, even as a child, especially as an adult. David continued. After that, he started using credit. Credit cards, personal loans, or lines of credit. At first it was manageable. Then it wasn't. The numbers became larger. The payments became heavier. The pressure increased. I stared at the papers, page after page. Debt, 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 more debt. How had I missed all of this? Then I remembered. Because Michael never told me. And because I trusted him. Trust sometimes blinds us. David flipped another page. This was the turning point. I looked down. A business proposal. Failed. Substantial losses. My stomach dropped. How much, David told me. I nearly stopped breathing. The amount was far larger than I expected. Far larger than anything Michael could realistically repay quickly. No. David nodded. I'm afraid so. For several moments, I simply stared at the document. Not because of the money, because of the silence. Years of silence. Years of carrying this burden alone. Years of pretending everything was fine. Then another painful realization struck me. Jennifer had known. Of course she had known. The arguments. The panic. The phone calls. The desperation. None of it had appeared overnight. She had been living with this reality for years. That didn't excuse her behavior, but it explained it. David seemed to read my thoughts. She's involved. I nodded slowly. I figured. She signed some of the loans. I wasn't surprised. What else? David hesitated. Then he handed me another document. This one hurt more than the others. Much more. Because it wasn't financial. It was personal. I stared at the page. What is this? David sighed. Notes from conversations. My eyes narrowed. What conversations? The ones Michael had with lenders. I frowned. Then I noticed something. My name, repeatedly, again and again, and my name. I looked closer. And suddenly my heart sank. Michael had been reassuring people, explaining future financial options, describing potential resources. One of those resources was me. Not directly, not illegally, but enough to create a disturbing picture. He had implied that family assets existed, future inheritance, property, security, the house, always the house. I felt physically ill, not because he had broken the law, because he had built plans around something that wasn't his, around me, around my future, around my death. The realization left me speechless. David quietly waited. Finally, I spoke. He was counting on the house. David nodded. Yeah. The word landed like a hammer. Yes. Not maybe. Not possibly. Yeah, Michael wasn't trying to gain control of the house because he was greedy. Not entirely. He was desperate. Desperate people often convince themselves that bad decisions are reasonable, that manipulation is necessary, that betrayal is justified. Understanding that didn't make it hurt less. If anything, it hurt more, because now I could see the tragedy clearly. My son wasn't a villain. He was a frightened man making increasingly terrible choices. The conversation continued for nearly an hour. Each new detail revealed another layer of the problem. Missed payments, growing obligations, financial stress, damaged credit, pressure from multiple directions. By the end, the picture was undeniable. Michael and Jennifer were drowning, and they believed the house was the lifeboat. Eventually, David closed the folder. What are you thinking? I stared out the diner window. A young mother was helping her toddler cross the parking lot. The child kept stumbling. The mother kept catching him. Again and again, without frustration, without complaint. Just love. I felt tears forming. Do you know what hurts most? David remained silent, waiting. It isn't the debt. He nodded. I continued. It isn't even the lies. A tear slipped down my cheek. It's that he never trusted me enough to tell me that was the truth. If Michael had come to me honestly, if he had sat down and said, Mom, I made mistakes. Mom, I'm in trouble. Mom, I need help. Everything would have been different. Maybe not easy, but different. Instead, he chose deception. And deception creates wounds that money cannot heal. David leaned forward. Cindy, there's something else. I looked up. Another surprise. Wonderful. What now? His expression became serious. Very serious. I think they're preparing something. My stomach tightened again. What kind of something? The pressure is increasing. I waited. David folded his hands. People under this much financial strain eventually run out of options. The words felt ominous. What are you saying? I'm saying they may become more aggressive. I thought about the paperwork, the sudden kindness, the rehearsed conversations, the desperation in Jennifer's voice, the late-night arguments, and suddenly I understood. The signature. They needed the signature. That wasn't plan A. That was plan B. Which meant there had probably been a plan A before it, and if the signature failed, there would be a plan C. The thought chilled me. As I drove home later that afternoon, I couldn't stop thinking about Michael. Not the man he had become, the boy he used to be, the 16-year-old who wrote me that note after his father died, the boy who promised to take care of me someday, the boy who cried at his graduation, the boy who hugged me when I bought the house. Where had he gone? Or perhaps the more painful question was this: had he disappeared? Or had I simply refused to see who he was becoming? When I pulled into the driveway, I immediately sensed tension. The house felt different, heavy, uneasy, as though everyone inside was waiting for something. Jennifer was pacing in the kitchen. Michael sat at the table staring at his phone. Neither noticed me at first. Then Jennifer looked up. For a brief second, fear crossed her face. Real fear. The kind people feel when time is running out. And suddenly I knew whatever problem they were facing had become urgent, very urgent. The question was no longer whether they would push harder. The question was when. And deep down, I had a feeling the answer was coming soon. Very soon. 3 days after my breakfast with David, Michael announced that we were having a family gathering. The moment he said it, I knew exactly what it was. Not a family gathering. Not really. It was a performance, a carefully staged event, and I had a feeling I was supposed to play the role of the villain. The announcement came during dinner. Jennifer casually mentioned it while serving mashed potatoes. I thought it would be nice if everyone got together this weekend. Everyone. That turned out to mean relatives, family, friends, and a few people I hadn't seen in years. Michael smiled. "It's been too long." I smiled back. "That sounds lovely." Inside, I felt something very different. Because people who are desperate rarely do anything without a reason. And Michael was desperate. Saturday arrived. The house filled quickly. Cars lined the street. Voices echoed through the living room. Laughter filled the kitchen, for anyone looking from the outside. It appeared to be a normal family gathering, but I noticed things, little things. Michael seemed nervous. Jennifer kept checking her phone. And every conversation somehow drifted toward money, toward responsibility, toward family obligations. Almost as though the entire afternoon had been designed to create a particular narrative. Linda noticed it too. She arrived shortly after noon and immediately sat beside me. "Something feels off." I nodded. "It does?" She studied the room. "What are they doing?" "I think we're about to find out." The answer came about an hour later. Everyone had gathered in the living room. Coffee cups, desserts, small talk. Then Michael stood, and suddenly the room became quiet. Far too quiet. My stomach tightened. "Here we go." Michael cleared his throat. "I just wanted to say something." Several relatives nodded. Jennifer smiled supportively. The performance had begun. Michael started talking about family, about responsibility, about how difficult life had become. At first, his words sounded harmless, reasonable even. Then the direction shifted, slowly. Carefully, deliberately, he began describing financial pressures, the cost of raising children, the challenges of supporting multiple generations. People nodded sympathetically. Of course they did. Most of them didn't know the truth. Then came the first direct hit. It's not always easy carrying everyone. The room grew quieter. I noticed Stephen Brooks nodding immediately. Stephen had always admired Michael, almost blindly. "What do you mean?" someone asked. Michael sighed dramatically. "Just life." More nods, more sympathy. Then Jennifer jumped in. "We've been doing our best." The rehearsed nature of it all was becoming obvious. At least to me. Perhaps not to everyone else. Stephen spoke up. "You're a good son, Michael." There it was, validation. Exactly what Michael wanted. The conversation continued, each comment carefully building the same story. Michael worked hard. Michael sacrificed. Michael supported his family. Michael carried burdens. Eventually, someone asked the question I suspected they wanted. "It must be difficult." Michael laughed softly. "You do what you have to do." Then he glanced toward me. Only briefly, but everyone noticed. And suddenly the room understood the implication. Or at least the version Michael wanted them to understand. I felt Linda stiffen beside me. She knew exactly what was happening. Michael continued. "You can't turn your back on family." The words sounded noble, generous, selfless. The problem was that they weren't true. At least not in the way he intended. Jennifer placed a hand on his arm. "I'm proud of everything you've done." A few relatives nodded. One even smiled at me, as though I should be grateful. The irony was almost unbearable. Then Stephen spoke again. "Not everyone would take care of their mother the way you have." Several heads nodded. Agreement spread through the room. I sat perfectly still. My pulse remained calm, much calmer than I expected, because something had changed inside me. A few months earlier, this would have devastated me. Now I simply felt sad. Sad watching my son tell a story that wasn't true. Sad watching people believe it. Sad watching desperation transform into dishonesty. Eventually, Stephen looked directly at me. "You must appreciate everything Michael does for you, so." The room became silent. Waiting. Watching. Expecting. I smiled politely. "I appreciate many things." Now, it wasn't a lie. I appreciated Emily. I appreciated Linda. I appreciated David. What I didn't appreciate was manipulation. Stephen seemed unsatisfied. "Michael's a good man." I nodded. "He can be." A few people exchanged uncomfortable glances. The tension was becoming visible now. Jennifer immediately stepped in. "Michael carries so much responsibility." Again, the narrative. The burdened son. The dependent mother. The heroic provider. I listened quietly. Then something unexpected happened. Emily spoke. The 12-year-old who had remained silent most of the afternoon suddenly stood up. "That's not true." The room froze. Jennifer's face immediately tightened. "Emily." "No?" Emily looked upset. Very upset. Grandma helps everybody. Nobody spoke. The courage of children is remarkable, especially when adults are busy protecting lies. Jennifer forced a smile. "Honey, no." Emily's voice shook. "But she does." The room became awkward, painfully awkward. Michael looked embarrassed. Jennifer looked angry. and I felt my heart breaking for my granddaughter. Because she was being placed in the middle of something she should never have been part of. Eventually, Michael changed the subject. The conversation moved on. But the atmosphere never recovered. Not completely. People sensed something was wrong, even if they didn't understand what. About an hour later, the gathering began winding down. Guests prepared to leave, coats were collected, goodbyes exchanged. Then Stephen approached me privately. His expression looked sympathetic, almost pitying. "Cindy." "Yes." "You should be thankful." I stared at him. "Thankful." "For Michael." The words hit harder than he intended. Because he genuinely believed them. He wasn't being cruel. He simply didn't know. Nobody knew. Not yet. I smiled politely. Then I said something that surprised even me. "Stephen, how much do you know about this house?" His eyebrows rose. "The house? Yes." He laughed. "What do you mean?" I simply smiled. Never mind. But his confusion lingered. And for the first time all afternoon, I saw uncertainty. The gathering finally ended around 6 o'clock. The house became quiet again. Peaceful, at least on the surface. I helped clear dishes. Jennifer barely spoke. Michael avoided eye contact. Emily stayed close to me. As though she sensed a storm approaching. And perhaps she did, because later that evening, after everyone had left, I walked upstairs to my room. Then I opened my closet. Inside sat a small lockbox. The same lockbox that had remained untouched for years. Slowly, I removed it, placed it on the bed, and opened it. Inside were the documents. The deed, the purchase records, the payment history. Every piece of evidence, every piece of truth. For years, those papers had remained hidden because I never imagined needing them. Now everything was different. Because Michael had crossed a line. Not legally, emotionally, he had publicly rewritten history. And I could no longer allow it. As I carefully organized the documents into a folder, my phone rang. It was David. I answered immediately. "Cindy." His voice sounded urgent. "What happened? I found something." My stomach tightened. "What?" A brief silence followed. Then David spoke. "The situation is worse than we thought." I gripped the phone tighter. "How much worse?" His answer made my blood run cold. "Cindy, I think Jennifer has known the truth about the house for years. And suddenly everything I thought I understood changed. I didn't sleep at all that night. After David told me he believed Jennifer had known the truth about the house for years, my mind refused to rest. I sat alone in my bedroom long after midnight. The folder of documents lay open on the bed beside me. The deed, the purchase records, the bank transfers, the closing documents, every piece of evidence, every piece of truth. For years, those papers had remained hidden because I trusted my family. Now they looked less like records and more like protection. Around 2 a.m, I finally stopped asking myself whether David was right, because deep down, I already knew he was. Too many things suddenly made sense. Jennifer's confidence, her constant references to the house, her assumption that it would eventually belong to her and Michael, the pressure, the manipulation, the paperwork. People don't act that way unless they believe they know something. And somehow, somewhere along the line, Jennifer had learned the truth. The only question was how much she knew. Saturday morning arrived cold and gray. The weather matched my mood perfectly. At 9 o'clock, David arrived. He carried a briefcase. The same briefcase I had seen him carry for years. Except this time it felt different. Today it wasn't holding paperwork. It was holding the truth. And the truth was finally about to come out. The family gathering from the previous weekend had created tension that never fully disappeared. By noon, Michael looked exhausted. Jennifer looked anxious. Emily looked confused. Nobody was pretending anymore. Finally, around 3 o'clock, I asked everyone to sit down in the living room. My voice was calm, surprisingly calm. Michael frowned. "What's going on?" I smiled gently. "We need to talk." Jennifer immediately became defensive. "About what?" I looked directly at her. "The house." The color drained from her face. Just for a second, but I saw it. And so did David. Michael looked confused. "What about it?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I opened the folder. The room became silent. Completely silent. Then I removed the first document. The original deed. I placed it on the coffee table. Michael glanced at it, then frowned. "What is this?" "The deed." He looked annoyed. "Okay." I nodded. "Read it." For a moment he didn't move. Then he picked up the document. His eyes scanned the page. A few seconds later, confusion appeared. Then surprise. Then disbelief. "What is this?" I repeated myself. "The deed." Michael looked again. This time much more carefully. His hands visibly tightened. Because there it was. In black and white, Cindy Simmons, owner, not Michael Simmons, not Jennifer Simmons, Cindy Simmons. The room felt frozen. Jennifer stared at the floor. David remained silent. Emily looked between all of us without understanding. Finally, Michael spoke. "This doesn't mean," David interrupted for the first time. "Actually, it means exactly what it says." The room went silent again. Michael looked at him. Then back at me. Then at the document. "No." The word sounded weak. The word. Uncertain. Almost childlike. I reached into the folder again. One by one, I placed additional documents on the table. Purchase agreements, closing statements, wire transfers, bank records, checks, evidence, years of evidence. The truth didn't need emotion. The truth already had paperwork. Michael's face continued losing color. "Mom." His voice barely worked. "Mom, what is all this?" I looked directly at him. "This is the house." He stared at me. I continued. "This is the money I spent." Another document. "This is the insurance payout from your father's death." Another. "This is my savings." Another. "This is the investment account I emptied." Another. "This is every sacrifice you never knew about." Nobody spoke. Not even Jennifer. For perhaps the first time since I had known her. She looked genuinely frightened. Then Stephen Brooks, who had stopped by unexpectedly that afternoon, spoke from across the room. "Wait, His eyes widened. You bought the house? I nodded. Yes. Stephen looked stunned. But Michael said. I know what Michael said. The room became painfully quiet. Every person present suddenly realized they had been hearing only part of the story. And that part had been wrong. Very wrong. Michael looked overwhelmed. No. He shook his head. No. You helped. David leaned forward. No. His voice was firm. She purchased the property entirely. Michael stared at him. David continued. Every payment, another document, every legal filing, another, every ownership record, another. The houses belonged to Cindy from the beginning. The silence that followed felt endless. Then something unexpected happened. Jennifer started crying, not dramatically, not loudly, quiet tears, the kind people shed when they realize the situation is collapsing around them. Michael looked at her, confused. What? Jennifer covered her face. For several seconds, she couldn't speak. Finally, she whispered, I knew. The room exploded. What? Michael practically shouted the word. Jennifer looked broken. I knew. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Even David looked surprised. Michael stared at his wife. What do you mean you knew? Jennifer lowered her eyes. Years of secrets seemed to pour out of her all at once. When we moved in, her voice trembled. I saw some of the paperwork. The room remained frozen. Michael looked like he had been struck. You knew? She nodded. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I wasn't completely sure at first. Another pause. But later I found out. My heart sank. Not because she knew. Because she never told him. Not out of honesty. Not out of integrity. She had simply used the information, quietly, carefully. For years, Michael looked devastated. You let me believe. Jennifer started crying harder. I didn't know how to tell you. That was probably true. But it wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was far uglier. She hadn't told him because the misunderstanding benefited her. And now everyone could see it. Every relative, every friend, and every witness. The narrative had shattered. Completely. Stephen sat speechless. The same man who had praised Michael a week earlier now looked horrified. Eventually he turned toward me. Cindy. His voice cracked. I'm sorry, I smiled sadly. You didn't know. No. He shook his head. I didn't. Neither had anyone else, because nobody had heard my side. For years I had remained silent. And silence allows others to write your story for you. Michael finally looked at me, really looked at me. Not as an obstacle, not as a burden, not as a problem. As his mother, for the first time in months, I saw shame. Real shame. The kind that reaches deep into a person's soul. His eyes filled with tears. I didn't know. I believed him. That was the tragedy. I genuinely believed him. Michael had been selfish, entitled, weak. But in that moment, I understood something important. Jennifer had manipulated him too. Not completely. His choices were still his own. But she had helped build the illusion. and together they had convinced themselves that the house was already theirs. The truth had finally destroyed that illusion. The room remained silent for a very long time. Then I closed the folder. The evidence had spoken. The truth had spoken. Now there was only one decision left to make. A decision that would change all of our lives forever. After the truth came out, nobody knew what to say. The silence in the living room felt heavier than any argument. For years, everyone had believed one version of the story. Now they were staring at another. And the two versions couldn't coexist. One of them had to be true. The documents had already answered that question. Michael sat motionless. Jennifer stared at the floor. Emily looked confused and frightened. David remained calm. As for me, I felt strangely peaceful. Not happy, not victorious, just peaceful. The burden of silence was finally gone. For years, I had allowed others to define my role. The dependent mother. The burden, the woman being supported. Now the truth stood in the middle of the room where everyone could see it. No explanation necessary, no defense required, just facts. Eventually, Stephen cleared his throat. Dear Cindy. I looked at him. I owe you an apology. I smiled gently. You don't owe me anything. Yeah, I do. His voice shook. I judged you. I didn't answer him. Because he was right. Many people had. Not maliciously, just carelessly. The way people often do when they hear only one side. Stephen looked at Michael. Then back at me. I should have asked questions. A few others nodded. The room seemed filled with people suddenly reconsidering things they thought they understood. Then Michael finally spoke. His voice barely worked. Mom. I looked at him. He seemed smaller somehow. Not physically, emotionally. The confidence that had fueled months of resentment was gone. All that remained was shame. Why didn't you tell me? The question surprised everyone, including me. Out of all the things he could have asked, that was the one he chose. Why didn't you tell me? I thought about it for several seconds. Then I answered honestly. Because I never wanted you to feel indebted to me. The room remained quiet. I continued. When your father died, I promised myself something. A tear slipped down my cheek. I promised I would help you build a life. Michael lowered his head. I wasn't trying to buy gratitude. Another pause. I wasn't trying to create a debt. Another. I was trying to give you freedom. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Michael began crying. Not quietly, not politely. The kind of crying that comes when years of denial finally collapse. I had not seen him cry like that since Robert's funeral. The sight broke my heart. Because despite everything that had happened, he was still my son. Still the little boy I had carried, still the teenager I had protected, still the young man whose future had mattered more to me than my own. Jennifer suddenly stood. Everyone turned toward her. She looked devastated. I need to say something. No one interrupted. No one moved. Jennifer wiped her eyes and then looked directly at me. I was wrong. The words came slowly and painfully, but they came. I was wrong about a lot of things. I said nothing. She continued. When I first learned about the house, I was shocked. Her voice trembled. I couldn't understand why Michael didn't know. The room remained silent. At first, I wanted to tell him. Michael looked up sharply. Jennifer lowered her eyes. But then, she stopped, struggled, then continued. Then life got complicated. Complicated. Such a simple word for something so destructive. The debt started. Another pause. The pressure started. Another. And eventually, tears rolled down her cheeks. I convinced myself the house would solve everything. Nobody spoke. Because everyone already knew she was telling the truth. The desperation. The manipulation. The pressure, it all made sense now. Not excusable, but understandable. And sometimes understanding is more painful than anger. Michael stared at his wife. You let me believe I was supporting Mom. Jennifer nodded weakly. I know. You let me believe the house was ours. More tears. I know. The devastation on Michael's face was difficult to watch. Because for the first time, he wasn't just confronting what he had done. He was confronting how badly he had been deceived. And how willingly he had deceived himself. The room remained silent for several minutes. Then David finally spoke. Cindy, I looked toward him. What do you want to do? Every head turned toward me. The question everyone had been avoiding. The question that mattered most. What happens now? What happens when trust breaks? What happens when family wounds each other? What happens when the truth finally arrives? I looked around the room. At Michael. At Jennifer. At Emily. Then I took a long breath. I've been thinking about that. Michael immediately looked terrified. Genuinely terrified. For the first time, I realized he expected me to throw them out. The possibility had probably haunted him ever since the documents appeared. And honestly, part of me had considered it, not out of revenge, out of self-protection, because hurt people eventually reach their limit. But then I looked at Emily. Sweet Emily. The only person who had defended me when nobody else would. The only person who had consistently shown kindness. And suddenly the answer became clear. I'm not selling the house. Relief immediately flashed across Emily's face. Then mine. Because I knew it was the right decision. I continued. And I'm not throwing anyone out. Michael burst into tears again. Jennifer covered her mouth. But I wasn't finished. However, the room became tense again. There will be changes. David nodded slightly, as though he had expected that. I looked directly at Michael. For now, ownership remains exactly where it has always been. He nodded immediately. Of course. Then I looked at Jennifer. And there will be complete financial transparency. Neither argued, neither complained, because neither had any position from which to complain. The truth had removed that. Finally, I looked at both of them. Together. I will help you solve this. Their eyes widened. But not by surrendering the house. The relief on David's face was immediate. He had clearly worried about that possibility. I continued. We will face the debts honestly. Another pause. We will stop hiding. Another. We will stop lying. Another. And we will start acting like a family again. Nobody spoke. Because many truths don't require responses. Only acceptance. A few minutes later, the gathering finally ended. People left quietly, thoughtfully. The atmosphere had completely changed. Not healed, but changed. Healing takes time. Truth only opens the door. As evening approached, I sat alone on the back porch. The same porch where I had spent countless afternoons wondering how everything had gone so wrong. A few minutes later, Emily joined me. She sat beside me without saying anything, just like her grandfather used to do. Eventually, she slipped her hand into mine. Grandma, yes. Are we going to be okay? I looked toward the sunset, then toward the house, my house, our home, a place that had caused so much pain, and yet somehow still held the possibility of healing. I squeezed her hand. Yes. She smiled, and for the first time in a very long time, I truly believed it. But one final conversation still needed to happen. A conversation between a mother and her son. A conversation decades in the making. And before this story ended, Michael would finally tell me the truth he had been hiding from everyone, including himself. The house felt different after the truth came out. Not better. Not worse, just different. For months, every room had carried tension. Every conversation had felt like a negotiation. Every meal had felt like a test. Now the lies were gone. And while the truth had hurt everyone, it had also removed something poisonous from the air. For the first time in a long while, nobody was pretending. The following weeks were uncomfortable. Healing usually is. People like to imagine reconciliation as a dramatic moment. A tearful apology. A heartfelt embrace. A single conversation that fixes everything. Real life doesn't work that way. Real healing is slower, messier, more complicated. It happens one decision at a time. One honest conversation at a time. One difficult day at a time. The first major change came when Michael finally agreed to show me everything. Every debt, every loan, every missed payment, and every financial mistake. No secrets, no excuses, just facts. We sat at the kitchen table for nearly 4 hours. Michael looked exhausted, not physically, emotionally. The burden of carrying years of deception had finally caught up with him. At one point, he slid a stack of papers toward me. I don't even know where to start. For a moment, I saw the 16-year-old boy who had lost his father. The boy who had looked terrified of the future. The boy who had needed guidance, not the angry man who accused me of living off him. Just my son, broken, ashamed, human. I looked at the paperwork, then at him. Start with the truth. His eyes filled with tears. And for the first time in years, he did. The stories poured out slowly. Bad investments. Poor decisions. Attempts to recover losses by taking bigger risks. Embarrassment. Pride. Fear. The deeper we went, the clearer the picture became. Most of Michael's problems weren't financial. The debt was only the symptom. The real problem was shame. He couldn't bear admitting failure, especially to me, especially after all I'd sacrificed. The irony was heartbreaking. The very love that should have made him feel safe had somehow made him afraid. Afraid of disappointing me. Afraid of looking weak. Afraid of admitting he needed help. And so he chose secrecy instead. The secrecy became lies. The lies became desperation. And desperation nearly destroyed our family. Jennifer joined us later that afternoon. She looked nervous. Unlike Michael, she didn't cry. Jennifer wasn't the crying type. Instead, she looked exhausted. Like someone who had spent years carrying anxiety and finally couldn't hold it anymore. For a long time, none of us spoke. Then she surprised me. "Cindy." I looked up. "I'm sorry. Simple words. No excuses. No explanations. No justifications. Just an apology. For several seconds, I didn't know what to say, because despite everything, I could see she meant it. Finally, genuinely, I nodded. "Thank you." Her eyes filled with tears. That was enough. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Just a beginning. The weeks that followed brought more changes. David helped reorganize their finances. Several debts were consolidated, others were negotiated, some assets were sold. The process wasn't pleasant, but it was honest, and honesty has a strange way of creating hope, even when circumstances remain difficult. One afternoon, David pulled me aside. "You know what surprises me most?" "What?" "They're actually making progress." I smiled. "Really?" he nodded. "For the first time, they're facing reality." Reality. Such a simple word. Such a powerful thing. You can't solve problems you refuse to acknowledge. Michael was finally acknowledging them. That mattered. A lot. Still, I knew something else had to change. Not just for Michael, for me. For decades, my life had revolved around other people. First Robert, then Michael, then Emily. I had spent so many years caring for everyone else that I had forgotten how to care for myself. Linda reminded me of that. As usual, one Thursday morning she dragged me to lunch. Not invited. Dragged. "Cindy." "What?" "You need a life." I laughed. "I have a life." "No." She pointed her fork at me. "You have responsibilities." I laughed harder. She wasn't amused. "I'm serious." The more we talked, the more I realized she was right. For years I'd been waiting for retirement, waiting for the right time, waiting for life to begin. And suddenly I was 68 years old. How much longer was I planning to wait? The following month, I joined a local community center, and then a book club, then a gardening group. To my surprise, I enjoyed all of it. I made friends, real friends, people who knew me as Cindy, not mom, not grandma, not a caretaker, just Cindy. It felt wonderful, strange, but wonderful. Meanwhile, Things at home continued improving. Slowly, not perfectly. There were setbacks, awkward moments, old habits. But progress was happening. The biggest surprise came from Michael. One evening, he knocked on my bedroom door. A gesture that instantly reminded me of childhood. "Come in." He entered slowly, looking nervous. Again. He seemed nervous around me a lot lately. I wasn't sure whether that was progress or not. "Can we talk?" "Of course." He sat in the chair beside the window. The same chair where I had spent countless nights crying after Robert died. For several moments, he said nothing. Then finally, "I don't think I've ever really known who you are." The statement caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" He stared at the floor. "I've always known you as Mom." I remained quiet. He continued. "The person who fixes things." Another pause. "The person who sacrifices." Another. "The person who's always there." His voice cracked. "But I never stopped to think about your life." The room became silent. Not uncomfortable silence. Thoughtful silence. "I know." He looked up. The sadness in his eyes felt genuine. "I should have." I nodded. "Yes, T." A tear rolled down his cheek. "I don't deserve how patient you've been." "No." The answer surprised him. And honestly, it surprised me too. "No." I shook my head. "No, you don't." The honesty hung in the room. Raw, uncomfortable, necessary. Then I reached over and took his hand. "But growth isn't about deserving." His eyes widened slightly. "It's about choosing." I squeezed his hand. "You can choose to be better." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he nodded. Slowly, and I believed him. Not because he promised, not because he cried, because his actions were finally beginning to match his words. As summer approached, life became calmer, lighter, more peaceful. Then one evening, several months after the truth came out, Michael knocked on my door again. Only this time, he looked different. Determined, resolved, as though he had finally reached a decision. Something important was coming. I could see it immediately. The final conversation. The conversation we had both been avoiding. A conversation not about debt, not about houses, not about paperwork. A conversation about us. About a mother and son. About the damage that had been done. And whether love could survive it. The conversation happened on a quiet Sunday evening. The kind of evening Robert used to love. The sun was setting. The neighborhood was peaceful. And for the first time in years, there was no tension hanging over the house, no arguments, no secrets. No lies, just silence. Honest silence. Michael knocked on my bedroom door. "Mom, come in." He entered slowly, then closed the door behind him. For several moments, neither of us spoke. We simply looked at each other. A mother, a son, two people connected by a lifetime of love, and and wounded by a single season of mistakes. Finally, Michael sat down. "I think I owe you the truth." I smiled sadly. "I think so too." He looked out the window, then back at me, back at... And for the next hour, he told me everything. Not about the debt. I already knew about that. Not about Jennifer. I knew enough about that too. What he told me was something deeper, something far more painful. He told me about shame, about failure, about fear, the emotions he had hidden for years. You know what the worst part was? His voice sounded tired. "What?" He laughed softly. A broken laugh. "Every time I looked at you, I frowned." "What do you mean?" He lowered his eyes. "You always seemed stronger than me." My heart broke because that wasn't how I saw it at all. But he continued. "Dad died." A pause. "You survived." Another. "You worked 2 jobs." Another. "You built a life." Another. "You bought a house." Another. "You never gave up." His voice cracked. "And every time I failed at something." Tears filled his eyes. I felt smaller. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he whispered, "I was ashamed." The honesty in those words hit harder than anything else. Not because they excused his behavior, because they explained it. So much of human cruelty begins with hidden shame. People who feel small often try to make others look smaller. People who feel powerless often seek control. People who fear failure often blame others. And somewhere along the way, my son had started doing exactly that, not because he hated me, because he hated what he saw in himself. Michael wiped his eyes. "I spent years pretending everything was fine." I nodded. "I know." "The debt got worse." Another pause. "I got scared." Another. "Then I got desperate." Yeah. Another. "And eventually..." He looked away. I started believing my own lies. That sentence stayed with me. Because it was true. Michael hadn't simply lied to others, and he had lied to himself for years, until fiction felt like reality, until resentment felt justified, until gratitude disappeared. Until he convinced himself that I was somehow the burden, a burden inside a house I had bought. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so tragic. Eventually, I reached over and took his hand, the same hand I had held when he learned to walk, the same hand I had held at Robert's funeral, the same hand I had nearly lost emotionally over the previous year. "Michael," he looked up. "Yes." "You hurt me." Fresh tears appeared immediately. "I know." "No." I squeezed his hand gently. "I don't think you do." He stared at me. And for the first time, I allowed myself to tell him the truth. The whole truth. There were nights I cried myself to sleep. His face collapsed. There were mornings I wondered where my son had gone. More tears. There were moments when I thought I had failed as a mother. He shook his head violently. "No." "Yes." My voice remained calm. Because healing requires honesty. Even painful honesty. I questioned everything. The room became silent. Michael cried openly now. Not out of guilt, out of grief. Grief for the damage he had caused. Grief for the years he couldn't get back. Grief for the trust he had broken. Eventually he whispered, "I'm sorry." 3 simple words. But this time they felt different. Not rehearsed. Not defensive. Not convenient. Real. I believed him. And strangely enough, that was enough. Not enough to erase the past. Nothing can do that. But enough to build a future. After a long silence, Michael spoke again. "There's something else." I raised an eyebrow. "What?" He smiled weakly. "For months, I've been trying to figure out how to make things right." I laughed softly. "Good luck with that." To my surprise, he laughed too. The first genuine laugh we had shared in a very long time. Then he reached into his pocket and handed me a folded piece of paper. "What is this?" "Open it." I unfolded the paper. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then I realized it was a plan, a detailed plan, and budgets, savings goals, debt reduction milestones, projected timelines, housing plans, future financial targets. I looked up, confused. Michael smiled. "We're moving." "What? Not tomorrow?" He laughed. "Not next month." Another smile. But eventually, I stared at him. "You don't have to." "I know." The answer came immediately. And that mattered, because for the first time, he wasn't speaking from entitlement. He was speaking from responsibility. We need to build our own future. I felt tears forming. He continued, "Not live inside yours." For several seconds, I couldn't speak, because those words represented something far more valuable than money. Growth. Real growth. The kind that changes people. The kind that only comes after pain. A few months later, the plan was already working. The debts were shrinking. Michael's finances were improving. Jennifer had found additional work. The household atmosphere had transformed completely. Most importantly, honesty had become normal, not exceptional, normal. Then, nearly a year after everything began, another surprise arrived: Emily's 8th grade graduation. The ceremony itself was lovely, but that wasn't the surprise. The surprise came afterward. Emily stood at the podium during a student recognition segment and completely shocked everyone, including me. She held a prepared speech, then looked directly toward our family and smiled. "My grandmother taught me something important." My eyes widened. The audience grew quiet. Emily continued. "She taught me that generosity isn't weakness." A pause. "She taught me that forgiveness isn't surrender." Another. "And she taught me that family isn't about who owns a house." The audience chuckled softly. Then Emily smiled. "It's about who makes it a home." By that point, I was crying, and so was Michael, so was Jennifer. Even David looked emotional. When the ceremony ended, Emily ran straight toward me. I pulled her into my arms and held her tightly, very tightly, because suddenly I understood something. The house had never been the story, not really. The house was only the stage. The real story was family. Broken family. Healing family. Imperfect family. The kind most of us have. The kind worth fighting for. Later that evening, as I sat alone on the back porch watching the sunset, I thought about everything that had happened. The accusations, the betrayal, the lies, the pain, the truth, the forgiveness, and finally, the healing. A year earlier, my son had told me I was living off him while sleeping in the house I bought. Today, he was rebuilding his life. Today, he was becoming someone better. And today, for the first time in a long while, I felt something simple. Peace. Real peace. The kind that arrives when truth finally wins. The kind that arrives when love survives. The kind that arrives when a family finds its way home. Sometimes the deepest wounds don't come from strangers. They come from the people we love most. That is what makes family conflicts so painful. We expect understanding from family. We expect loyalty. We expect gratitude. And when those things disappear, the heartbreak can feel overwhelming. But this story is not really about a house. It is not about money, ownership, or debt. It is about truth. It is about what happens when pride replaces honesty and when assumptions replace communication. Many people carry burdens in silence. They hide their fears because they are ashamed. They hide their failures because they don't want to disappoint the people they love. Unfortunately, secrets rarely solve problems. More often, they create larger ones. Another lesson is that generosity should never require recognition. Cindy gave because she loved. She sacrificed because she cared. Yet even the most loving people must remember that healthy boundaries matter. Kindness should not require self-erasure. Perhaps the most important lesson is that forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness is choosing not to let pain control the future. It is allowing people the opportunity to change while still honoring the truth of what happened. Families are imperfect. People make mistakes, sometimes very painful mistakes. But when honesty returns, healing becomes possible. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever been misunderstood by someone you loved? Would you have forgiven Michael? Share your experience or opinion in the comments below. And if you enjoy emotional family stories about resilience, healing, and second chances, please like, subscribe, and join our community. Also, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. Thank you for being here. And remember, sometimes the strongest families are not the ones that never break. They are the ones that find the courage to heal.